like WA because you guys kind of took one for the team, if you remember. During the Voice, the polling, over the course of the polling, it was starting very, very high, very positively early on.
Yeah.
And I've got this great graphic when it turned. If you look at this graphic here, guys, what it shows you is the start, very, very positive. You know, we've got a massive majority of the country supporting it. And then just, it's sort of at this point, you might remember the dates a little bit better. The WA heritage laws really kicked off. Big protests were coming up. By the time we got to here, we saw a situation where Premier Cook, he was basically like, all right, we're going to repeal the heritage laws. We're not going to be doing it anymore. And is that the timeline or am I just sort of seeing things into it?
No, well, I haven't seen that graphic before, Joel, but I think it's a really excellent analysis. And I remember very early on in the piece, this Voice proposal, it felt a bit hopeless for those of us who are really concerned about its in enshrining division within our federal constitution. And therefore, as a result of that, enshrining division in our country. And we did feel a bit hopeless. I know you were certainly one of the ones who were more optimistic, certainly than me early on.
Right.
And
I like it when you remind me of that because everyone was like, it's going to pass.
Yeah. No. It was quite amazing. But then the sequence of events, as you say, quite right. And there were, I think, two very significant events. And Western Australia definitely had a part to play because it was the shambolic rollout of these Aboriginal cultural heritage laws by the WA Labor government that was quite a catalyst. It was a piece of legislation that they rammed through the parliament. Now, for those observing, they might say, well, what does it mean to ram a piece of legislation through parliament? Well, in Western Australia, we have two houses of parliament. There's proper processes to be followed. And we have standing orders. We have things like a requirement that if a government introduces a bill in the lower house, it sits on the table of the lower house for 3 weeks. Well, why does it do that? Well, because for opposition members, it's the first time that you've seen this thing. So it gives you an opportunity to get briefings, to speak to stakeholders, to decide what your party position is, so on and so forth. They rammed these laws through both houses of Parliament. And, we obviously pushed back on that, but that's what happened. Now, in the end, then the implementation was so shambolic. We had local governments that weren't sure whether they could plant a tree or not. When people were raising concerns, we had the Premier, Mr. Cook, calling them dogs. These people are, you people are dogs, returning to your vomit. So we had very unstatesmanlike language from the leaders who were doubling down. We had, as I say, local governments and ordinary West Aussies who were confused as to what they can and can't do. It was totally shambolic. And it is extraordinary, Joel, that in Western Australia, where we have a Labor government that has total control of both houses of Parliament, they have an absolute majority, you might call it a super majority, in both houses of Parliament. Now, of course, it's not unusual for a government to have a majority in the lower house. That's how they form government, right? Other than those rare instances where there's a minority government. But to have total control of the upper house, they don't have to persuade a Green, an Independent, nobody. They just ram through whatever they like. And in that context, for them to have repealed the legislation, the pressure was so great that they had to overturn their own legislation was remarkable. And so I think your graphic is quite right on there. The other thing would be interesting to do some correlation and some analysis is what impact was the entry of Jacinta Price into the whole debate. Because, I think the fair-minded political observers say that was pretty important and, created great momentum for the No campaign.
No, absolutely. And I think that, there was a coalescing at the very start of the Voice Referendum. It's so funny, we've been a year on from the win and everyone's been trying to, be like, oh, this is why it happened and this is why that happened. And at the very start, the Conservatives were divided. That was the problem. The Conservatives were in a situation where they had, Recognise a Better Way, and they had two other groups, and they had Advance ready to, ramp things up. And it was only slightly later that Recognise a Better Way sort of got wound down. People like Warren Mundine, he joined the Advance crew, and him and Jacinta Price became sort of a power couple on this particular topic, and they just sort of rammed the arguments. They just hit hit the pavement and did a great job. In terms of the ground game, it was terrible. There was the no voters did not have any ability to sort of mobilize ground troops. It was actually shocking. And no one said that yet, which has been a little bit frustrating to me, because if we want to win something like that again, that was a very easy proposal to win, the voice proposal. I mean, it was a no-brainer. Aussies were going to slam it down once they worked out there was no detail. But when you saw a situation where we're going to have a close vote in the future, maybe there's going to be something a bit closer that we vote on. You want to make sure that you have ground troops and to get out there.
Yeah.
But look, regardless, Advance did a great job. They got the win in the end. And, the whole team, and it was a team effort, which was really good.
Look, and the other thing, Joel, is as you say, it's been a year on. One of the things that I would like people to reflect on is how has the cause for Indigenous Australians improved over the last 12 months? Because I think, again, the vast majority of Australians, I certainly can say this in the West Australian context, genuinely care. They genuinely care. They genuinely have the view that every life has infinite value, that every life matters, and we want to see everyone flourish.
Yeah.
And I think that's at least where there ought to be some bipartisanship, but we've actually seen nothing over the last 12
What happened
months.
to the emergency, Nick? It was an emergency. We need the voice now. People are dying, and people are dying in custody, and there's no way to resolve it. People voted no, overwhelmingly no. In some states, they almost voted 70% no.
Yep.
Not including the people that didn't vote, which we all know that people that didn't vote probably would have leaned more to the no side. But then on top of that, they rammed through. They demonstrated that all that crap about, we need consent between relationships. They didn't believe in the consent of the governed and the governors.
Yep.
And they just sort of rammed it through on a state level. In South Australia, they've got their first South Australia voice now, who we've seen, who wasn't elected by some kind of, popular vote by all the Aboriginal people. There was a very tiny participation rate of Aboriginal people in South Australia that engaged in that vote. And we're going to see that rolled out in all the states. And, the heartbreaking thing for someone like me is the majority of the Liberal Party on the East Coast, they do support some sort of a treaty process, like the Victorian Liberals, I do believe the Queensland Liberals as well, New South Wales as well. And it's a lot of people is like, well, hang on, a referendum is one of the most sacred ways Aussie people have in their arsenal to say yes or no to something and to amend the Constitution. What do we have to do to stop this?
Yeah.
What would you reply?
Well, and the thing is, referendums need to be respected, right? I'll give you an example by way of an analogy. In Western Australia, because it's great to be here in Sydney where you've got your daylight savings operating. We don't have that in Western Australia, right? So we're a bit like Queensland, and a lot like Queensland in that respect. And there have been referendums in Western Australia in the past on this issue of daylight savings. Now, then it would have been around about, let's say, 2006, 2008, something like that. There was a proposal that was put forward that said, well, we're going to force on the people of Western Australia a 3-year trial of daylight savings. Now, that infuriated Western Australians. Why? Because they had consistently said, we don't want it. Well, what do you reckon happened after the 3-year trial? The voters came at the referendum with their brickbats and made sure that it was overwhelmingly defeated. So referendums need to be respected. You might not agree with the outcome of the referendum, but what is the point of going through such an expensive exercise to test the will of people and then go and doing the exact opposite? That's what people, I think, detest most of all about politics, is when leaders of the day say one thing and go and do the other.
And they're not cheap, are they? It was $500 million for the federal. It's like emergency.
Yep.
We've got to help the Aboriginal
and then,
people.
and then meanwhile, even if we forgive them for all of that, what's happening now? What are the concrete steps that are being taken? What's the plan? It's actually disgraceful.
It is, and and then on top of that, I forgot to say, guys, there was all the donations to the yes side and the no side. 20 million for the no side, 100 million for the yes side. Like, we're talking 500, 600 million dollars. Do you know how many? You might know the costs. How many nuclear power stations could we have like purchased and built. How many coal power stations could we purchased and built with that money? I used to know the numbers. I've forgotten the numbers now.
Yeah, and I'd like Western Australian voters to remember that the chief champion of this whole expensive, divisive voice debate was Premier Roger Cook. No one was a bigger champion for it than him. And he and his team obtained advice. I kept asking in Parliament, release the advice. Release the advice before we vote. Western Australians deserve to see what advice you've got. What is this advice all about? How is a federal voice going to impact Western Australia? Because obviously it was going to. To this day, they still haven't released it. They still keep it secret. Now, it was wrong to keep it secret before the referendum. What could possibly justify keeping it secret now? Like 1 year later, why keep hiding the advice? So I think we've still got to keep pressing them for it because, as you say, otherwise they then look to roll this out at a state level.
They're quite brilliant, aren't they? Like, they don't stop. Like, even facing an overwhelmingly 60% loss, it's like, no, they keep going. And it's like, it reminds me of Brexit in the UK in 2016. They won by like 51.4% of the vote to leave the European Union. And it took them like 8 years or something to properly leave. And you look at that as a bubble, this Canberra bubble, the only place voting no being Canberra. I can see why a lot of people in WA are like, those bloody eastern states, all their, the amount of problems they send us. Mate, Canberra's round the corner. It's a 3-hour drive from here. And we hate them more. I guarantee you we hate them more. And it's really frustrating because we see what's going on. We see our taxpayer funding, we're spending it to help people, to help the vulnerable. The Aboriginal people voted no. They actually voted no. And one of the things that their saving grace is, well, we're going to pursue the treaty because rural Aboriginals voted yes. That's not true. They manipulated that vote. And I'll go as far to say that. Jacinta Price on the victory night tried to say that. But I think a lot of people were like, oh, like that's not, let's let it be, let's be magnanimous in victory. And let's not go out there and say anything conspiratorial. On election day, Alec Dumaji, a friend of mine who I interviewed on The Voice, he's sort of like one of the heads of his tribe and his area. He said, I'm voting no. He's sort of part of the black sovereignty movement. He was on the phone with his mum, who said the election workers for the Electoral Commission were telling me that the Voice is going to do this and that. And he got this all on camera as he was recording it. It was all lies. You tell me, what kind of...
Well, in any event, they shouldn't be providing any information other than simply how to vote. That's not their role whatsoever. So if that has occurred, that is also a disgrace and ought to be investigated.
And it's not. And that's the problem. We saw this happening specifically in the rural voting centres that were set up in the Northern Territory, for example. And so they didn't have to rig the whole thing. They just had to sort of manipulate these little areas. And look, maybe these people, they just didn't realise and whatever. But that should never happen.
No, and I'm long fed up with lack of investigation when credible complaints are put forward. And we see this across the board in governance, both at a state and a federal level. There's too much just simply shrugging of the shoulders, going, oh well, and no further follow-up. We've got a classic case of that in Western Australia.
I hope you enjoyed that particular clip. Remember to like, subscribe, share this video, get it out there. We've got to break the echo chamber. But also, if you're trying to get a hold of me a little bit more directly, I have actually a whole membership group of people on Buy Me a Coffee. It's kind of a overrated eyebrow club that I've formed. You guys know how much I love eyebrows. If you click the link in my description or if you click the link in my bio, you will actually see a link to join the Buy Me a Coffee family that I'm building. I want to be able to share more with you guys as to what are my plans ahead of the election, what are my raw and uncensored predictions for the elections and the various bills going through the parliaments. But also, I want to hear from you guys. What are the big tools that you want to see to help you meander through the craziness that will be 2025? And what advice do you have for me? What do you think the biggest issues are? Some of the best projects I've come up with have been from your ideas. the How to Vote cards, the LGBT book registry, the reparations calculator. These are all things that you guys, from chatting with you, have inspired in me to form and make. I just happen to have the means to do it. But I want to actually, be walking around with both eyes open as to what's going on in this country. And the best way to do that is through you. It's through family. And I think that's why they try to destroy the family unit in this country. If you want to join the club, click the link in my description, click the link in my bio, join the family. There's 3 different eyebrow tiers: bronze, silver, and gold. You don't have to go for the gold one. The bronze one is really good. We're going to be chatting monthly on a Zoom together. We're going to be chatting about what's going on in this country, and I'm going to be able to hear about what's going on in your lives, what you guys need, and where you see things going. And I can be a little bit more raw with you and let's just say swear a little bit more, which I really want to do. I'll see you guys later. God bless you. Thank you again for your support, and I'll see you in 2025.